Time for the Morning Buzz. Former Vice President and GOP presidential candidate Mike Pence cracking a joke at last night's GOP primary debate when asked about mental competency tests. Your reaction, was that the only thing that he said that was funny?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what made that funny is the fact that it was a natural comment based off of a natural reaction, whereas everything else that he did seemed very scripted. Even when he was interrupting based upon his scripted lines. And I made the joke all morning long, speaking of jokes, that Mike Pence won if the contest last night was to be a TV president in a 1980s sitcom. Like, I think he won that battle, but that's not what we're talking about. To the underlying issue, though, president's mental competency. You have to go through a rigorous amount of tests if you want to be a pilot after a certain age, and you have hundreds of lives in your hands at that point. President has 330 plus million lives. I understand their HIPAA issues. I understand their civil liberties issues. I think it's a good idea. We need to make sure that we don't have a repeat of Biden.
Well, and I will say, it's got to be tough for former Vice President Pence, because he's running against his former boss, Mark, who is leading in the polls substantially.
That obviously makes it very tough because he's kind of riding on everything that Trump did well without any of the baggage that Trump brought with him, So it's, I guess you get to pick and choose. But with regards to the question that was asked of Mike Pence, he then actually said, no, he didn't believe there should be a competency test. And he said he had enough trust in the American voters to see through that and figure out, who might have mental issues. But 81 million people voted for Joe Biden, knowing that there was some cognitive impairment going on. 2.7 million voted for John Fetterman, even after the stroke, after he couldn't speak on live TV. Senator Feinstein, I don't know how many votes she got last time. So, Americans, even though we may know that there are cognitive issues, they're still voting for those individuals.
Yeah, well, going back to former Vice President Pence, Krysia, really quick here, the Wall Street Journal editorial board did say the former vice president often seemed like the adult in the room, especially on foreign policy.
I would tend to disagree, just because I think at a lot of points in time he had awkward pauses. We were discussing also the fact that he kept interrupting people, and it seemed very weird that he was strategically targeting Vivek Ramaswamy, even though there were others on stage, maybe Ron DeSantis, who also deserved some targeting in terms of their back and forth. But again, it was awkward by, the fact that the American public is laughing at this because it is a serious issue, and it raises the question about the fact that Washington elites are so out of touch, starting with Joe Biden. He really does need a cognitive test, especially after his comments in Maui, just comparing his own fire in his house with respect to this natural disaster. Yeah. So it's incredibly sad, actually, more so than funny.
And Todd, also, too, I mean, we thought, we weren't really sure, but there wasn't much going after former President Trump. It was not on the stage. It was more about going after, Vivek Ramaswamy, to be clear here. But there's the Pence quote from the Wall Street Journal editorial board that came out this morning. At the same time, though, I think the bigger question, and I know it's still early, it's 5 months to Iowa, but is this now Vivek versus Trump?
I don't know if I'd necessarily go that far, and I'd easily say that Vivek won the night last night. But to our point that we've been making thus far for the first 54 minutes, Ron DeSantis had a very high bar, and I think he met that bar. Nobody's going to say Ron DeSantis was unbelievable. Everybody's going to change their vote to Ron DeSantis after last night. But he did enough to not lose. I am curious to see if he does pick up anything with regard to Donald Trump. But I still think it is a two-person race going into Iowa 5 months in advance. It is Trump. It is DeSantis. We'll see if Vivek makes any inroads in the polls coming up.
Yeah,
or Nikki Haley.
Well, I was going to say Nikki Haley, and she definitely had some zingers against Vivek when it came to foreign policy, which we're going to get into. I promise we're going to get to that soundbite, because that was another zinger of a moment. She wasn't the only one that had a couple. All right, coming